commented, we have a few Haggadot in our home. In fact, we have close to 2,000. There's a Hebrew expression, Mishugala Davar, that a person could be crazy about something, and I am really crazy about Passover, and in particular about the Haggadah. There's so much to say about it, but tonight, I want to focus specifically on something that we, pardon the pun, we pass over pretty quickly as we read through the Haggadah, and those are the four sons, or as I like to say today, the four children. So where does this come from, and what does it mean? And in particular, how has it been expressed through the ages? So if we look in the Mishnah, which is the first full description of Passover, we find the following statement. A second cup of wine is poured. This is after the Kiddush. And here the son or the child asks his father, and if the son has no understanding, his father teaches him to ask, how is this night different from all other nights? You know how that continues. And then finally it ends, that Mishnah ends, according to the son's understanding, his father instructs him. Now, the four sons do not appear in the Mishnah. They do appear in the Midrash and in the Talmud, but I think it's because of this particular statement, according to the son's understanding, his father instructs him. And so we have four types of children, I'm sure you're aware. Wise, we have one who's called a Rasha. I don't want to translate that word quite yet. We have a Tam, a simple child, or a simple one. And finally, we have She'ino Yodei Lishol, the one who doesn't know how to ask. What's fascinating to me, when I get a new Haggadah, the first thing I open to are the four children. I want to see how they are depicted or how they're spoken about in the commentary, because it tells us so much about who we are and where we come from. And through the ages, the four children have been a sort of a window into the outside world. So I'm going to take you and show you some of these different pictures of the four children as they are found throughout the ages in different Haggadot. Hold on for a second here. I'm going to make it so it's nice and large. Okay, you all see that? So this is a Haggadah from Spain in the 14th century. And you can see on the page in the Hebrew, beautifully illuminated, Chacham and Rasha. And as we look to the side of each of these names, we have a Chacham. We see a man with a long beard, just like your rabbi, right? And he's reading a book, and apparently he's teaching. But what's especially interesting, and what's interesting throughout the history of the four children, is that the most fascinating character among these four is definitely the Rasha. So look at the Rasha here. It's a little bit surprising. Remember, this is the 14th century, and there are two things that stand out about this Rasha. The first is he's not a child at all. He's an adult. And the second thing is he's a soldier. Not only is he a soldier, but he's a Moorish soldier. And we know that by the kind of sword that he's holding and also the clothes that he's wearing. By the way, the same thing is true of the Chacham. He's not a child. He's an adult. It wasn't until the 20th century that on a regular basis, the four children are depicted as children. Up until then, most of the time they were depicted as adults. So this is the called the Ashkenazi Haggadah by a man named Yoel ben Shimon, who lived in around the middle of the 15th century. And this is from Germany. And as you look over on the left-hand side, next to the word Rasha, it's a little bit hard to see, but you can make out the fact that the Rasha is also a soldier, and he's wearing armor. In other words, the first one reflected the reality of life in Spain, Moorish soldiers. And here, this is Germany, and he's wearing armor just as a soldier would have worn in Germany at that time. And by the way, stop and think about this for a moment. How many Jewish soldiers do you think there were in the Middle Ages in the militias throughout Europe? Zero. There weren't any. The fact that they are depicted this way is because a Jew's greatest fear was a soldier. When he saw a soldier coming, he hid. And so the Rasha is depicted not as a Jewish character, interestingly, but as a soldier. This is 1695, and this is known as the Amsterdam Haggadah. And interesting, this is the first time that all four children or four characters appear together in one picture. From right to left, we have the Chacham, we have the Rasha, who happens to be Hannibal. The picture is borrowed from another Haggadah. Then we have the simple child. And the last one, the smallest one, is the one who doesn't know how to ask. If you look carefully, you will see that the one who doesn't know how to ask is an adult. He's just smaller than the others. And in the medieval art, very often children were depicted as small adults. So all four of them here grow in size, because I think it's suggesting in this Haggadah that in fact we all go through these stages of life from young to old. But here they're all depicted again as adults. The 20th century now, this is by Jacob Steinhardt, who was a German Jew, fought in World War I for the Germans. In 1933, he made Aliyah, and he taught at the Betzalel school. This Haggadah was done around the year 1920, around the year 1928. And if you look, it's easy to pick out the Rasha, once again, because he's wearing a World War I helmet, and he's holding a sword. Again, he's a soldier. And next to him on the left is the Tam, and the Tam has a dunce cap on. Not a very nice way to depict him, but it's interesting to note that in the Yerushalmi, the Tam is not called a Tam, he's called a Tipesh, a fool or an idiot. So it may be that Steinhardt was familiar with the different terminology, and that's why he depicts him that way. Again, it's easy to find the Rasha here. He's standing with a sword, and in this picture, all of the people are depicted as Jews who lived on the island of Deshebra, which is just off the coast of Tunisia. Well, this was done by an American Jew, also an immigrant who came to America. And finally, we have probably the newest one of these. This is by the Israeli artist Agam. And again, we have sage, soldier, simple man, and the one who doesn't know how to ask, it just looks very unhappy, and he has question marks on his kippah. Now, something changes in 1948. Up until the 20th century, soldiers, we didn't really think of soldiers as Jews, although certainly there were Jews in World War I who fought. But here in 1948, soldiers now became our heroes because they were Israeli soldiers. So in this Israeli Haggadah, we have a picture of Israeli soldiers sitting around the Seder table, and the Seder is being led by, it's either Shlomo Goren or Theodor Herzl, I'm not sure which one, but the soldier now becomes a hero. He's been redeemed. I'm going to go on a little bit farther. In the 20th century, children begin to appear among the four children. Now they become children, but this tells us a whole story. So this is the very beginning of the 20th century. Mom and dad are sitting at the side of the table, and they almost look like statues. They're passive. And at the head of the table, who's sitting at the head of the table? It's the Rasha. What's he doing at the head of the table? He shouldn't be leading the Seder. Not only that, but he's smoking at the Seder table. He's leaning back on his chair, and he appears to be lecturing his father. At the left far corner, we see the wise child who's been relegated to the far end of the table because he's no longer valued in this community of immigrants coming from Europe and from all over the world to America. And the other two, the youngest, are both very carefully listening to the Rasha as he pontificates at the Passover Seder. Okay, and as you look at home, as you go through your Haggadahs at home, open up to the four children and ask yourself, what are these pictures trying to say? In the upper left-hand corner of this picture, you see the Rasha, and he's thumbing his nose at the tradition. So it wasn't violence that became the sign of the Rasha. It was the rejection of Jewish tradition. And again here, we see the Rasha with his book turned over. He doesn't want to read the book. He's making a fist, right? He's making a fist, and his eyes are chained because he's imprisoned by his own anger at the Jewish tradition. Very often political experiences influenced how we depicted the four children. This was a Soviet Jewry Haggadah, traditional Haggadah, but all the illustrations have to do with freeing Jews from Russia during the 1960s and 70s. And here, the Rasha is none other than, Brezhnev. Look at the picture of Brezhnev. Look at the picture of the Rasha here. And the other three children are looking on as he uses the Chanukiah, or as a menorah actually, to light his cigar. The only one who holds his head up with pride is the Chacham. So it's not knowledge, but it's pride in your tradition that makes him a Chacham. I'm going to skip this one for right now because I don't want to lose out. I haven't watched my clock. I don't want to miss out on this one. This is one of my favorite Haggadot. It's called the Moss Haggadah, and David Moss chose to place the iconography, the four children, each in a playing card. They look like the back of a playing card, and the reason he did that, he writes, is because when it comes to children, we are dealt a hand. We don't have a choice about the kind of children that we have. We get them and we love them despite who they are. So the wise, the wicked, the simple, and the one who doesn't know how to ask. The wise one is holding a book. Look where the book is in each picture. The wise one is reading a book. The wicked one is sitting on a hobby horse and he's sitting on the book. The simple one has a toy Torah, that's his book. And the jester, which appears, by the way, in medieval Haggadot, illuminated Haggadot, is standing on the book. So the book becomes the symbol of our relationship to our tradition. And I can take you back now to this one. This is called the Holocaust Haggadah, and there are no people in this Haggadah as a sign of what we lost during the Holocaust. Again, a very traditional text, but the artist depicts the four children through a book with Hebrew words, a burning book, a blank book, and a closed book. So finally, this is actually was a Haggadah that was created by the Reform movement. And if you look very carefully, you can see all four characters in the circle in the middle. Towards the top is the one who doesn't know how to ask. In the middle of the circle is the simple child, or is actually the wise child. On the left is the one who doesn't know how to ask, and on the right, on the bottom, somewhat sinister, is the wicked child. So I want to end finally with a question that I would like you to talk about at your Seder this year, and that is the whole question about labeling children, or labeling anyone for that matter. Is this an appropriate practice? I hope that you've seen that, in fact, even though we label these four types of people, or children, adults, whoever they are, in fact, we have a pretty nuanced and complex view of them. But when we label people, we often put them into a corner, and we make it very difficult for them to express themselves. So I'd like you to take a look at this quote. The four children provides an opportunity to talk about modern day labels and how we think of people with varying strengths and weaknesses. Can any child really be summarized with one terse label? Can any individual be described succinctly: wise, wicked, simple, or not knowing how to ask? Advocates for children with learning disabilities or learning differences often talk about people first language. For example, we talk about a child with autism and not an autistic child. And we refer to children with disabilities, learning disabilities, and not learning disabled children. So I'd like to suggest that we show Rahmanut for these 4 children who come to our Seder. And there are others, by the way, that we could talk about who are going to be there. And we not simply dismiss them. When we call someone wicked, well, we really make it so that we can never have a conversation with them. So talking about labels and when they're appropriate and when they're inappropriate might be a really good way to have a conversation when we come to this part of the Seder. And I made it. Thank you all very much.
Zaku Baruch. Wow.
Right.